A very warm welcome to the In-Service podcast series. My name is John Carroll. I'm the CEO and founder of the Service Council. Happy New Year. 2025 is here. Wow. It just seems crazy. Time flies. Hopefully you had the opportunity to spend time with your family and friends and unplug and rejuvenate that battery and now we hit 2025 with vigor, and we're ready to go here. 2025 brings a lot of promise, brings a lot of trepidation, and I'm joined today by my colleague Gerardo Pelayo. He's the VP of Research and Advisory of the Service Council. And this is one of the fun ones for us. This is where we get to sort of step out of, the leaning on the data, the analyzing, the corresponding to the data in terms of reading and reacting against it. Use a little bit of that to foundationally build our opinions, but really cull from the discussions that we're having day in and day out with members and global partners and alike, to derive what we feel are some of the top predictions for this coming year. Where are we heading? What are the things that are going to be faced? What are the opportunities? And so we're going to jump right into it. Today's podcast is recorded. It will be available on whatever podcast platform you subscribe to. It's available on our website. It's available on LinkedIn. We are actually recording videos, so hello, we see you. If you care to comment, read, and react to our discussion on LinkedIn Live, we encourage you to do so. We'll try and respond to that as we go. And if we don't, we'll circle up with you one-to-one. And by the way, if I wish there was a function on this platform that allowed you to throw the bullshit flag, right? So if you hear something that you don't agree with, and want to debate us, we welcome that opportunity. Gerardo and I are the Stump the Chump portion of this podcast is not able to be executed on this platform, but we're happy to have a conversation with you one-to-one or with your team to talk through our viewpoints. So without further ado, Gerardo, are you ready to rock?
I am.
All right, let's do it. Number one. We've got this rising existential threat to service leaders. I talked about it in my opening statement at the symposium. I talked about how service leaders that we benchmark unilaterally feel that they have a seat at the C-suite. In fact, a majority do. 54% of responding service leaders feel like they're invited to the boardroom discussion, feel like service is recognized strategically. And then I showed a little bit of data that combated that. And looked at Wall Street's viewpoint of service and how less than 10 of Fortune 100 companies actually have a service leader that is appointed a V+ level role, right? And obviously we talked about all the reasons why there should be a service leader welcome to the C-suite discussion, but that it was still challenged. Gerardo, I have some viewpoints here, but I'm going to open the discussion for you to read and react against this. What are your viewpoints on this challenge here?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, John, and thank you everybody for joining. So one of the signals that we see supporting this is the coming back of the CIO and the power that it holds in the agenda for that influences operations. The Chief Digital Officer, Chief Digital Transformation Officer roles in the top 100, Fortune top 100, has started to decrease. And along with that is the risk of, for example, all these artificial intelligence projects that have hit the pilot stage but have not really achieved that scalability that one was hoping for. Are they at risk of going on under the IT pipeline and therefore the delays, the competition with alternative projects? So that's one of the elements that we're definitely seeing. The other is, we heard at the symposium, one of the inputs from one of the participants was, we have to start talking the language of the CFO. And that is something that needs to be very, very at the top of the agenda for service leaders, to see how are the improvements in the customer experience, the investments in the employee experience, translating in business terms for the overall organization.
So a couple supplemental points behind Gerardo's, which were very well founded. Gerardo, thank you. I think just to capture his viewpoint on the CIO, the Chief Digital Officer, commandeering the technical roadmap. We've had this battle of line of business functional leaders digitizing digitally transforming and making all this progress in their little function, their little functional silo of the business, which is the wrong mindset, right? Of course, we all believe that that's the wrong mindset. What I'm hearing is this sort of post-mortem challenge that's being met by service leaders, where all the work that they've done to build enterprise systems, supplemental best of breed platforms that continue to innovate around those systems, that work is going to be unraveled, and that the chief digital officer is going to commandeer the technology pipeline and the roadmap, and that might snuff out all the work, all the good work that service leaders have been doing. So that's one angle. The second thing that I'm hearing a lot about is this regionalization of service, right? So you've got a chief service officer by role, by function, right? Because we don't hear the title chief service officer commonly. I wish we did. Actually, one of our board members just became chief service officer. Congrats, Sean LaRocco. But we're hearing a lot more of localization and how country leaders roll up into a commercial leader, and that commercial leader reports back to a general commercial leader. I like to challenge that. I think that there is an importance of standardization of service practices and approaches. We certainly appreciate localization efforts are required. There's cultural nuances. There's all sorts of regulatory nuances. We get it. But there is uniformity requirements in terms of becoming truly a service-led organization. And we would encourage you to continue to fight the good fight for the service leaders welcoming to that C-suite discussion. So that's number one. Gerardo, we good on this one?
We're good.
All right, let's go to number two. Back to you.
And part of the bridge is, hey, how do we solve this threat that is coming towards service leaders? And maybe it's about rethinking the way in which we're measuring the business. An example, again, is can we wrap our heads and our arms around service parts and the management, the revenue that can come from that? And we do see signals as well of why this could be this is a thing that requires attention. We do a couple of research projects during the year on the voice of the frontline, the voice of the customer, contact center agent, and the voice of the field service engineer. In both of this, we hear that management expectations, that customer expectations have significantly changed since they started in the role. But at least 2 in 5 agents or 2 in 5 technicians are saying that the KPIs that are being used in order to measure their performance, in order to measure the work and the value that they're actually providing, has not changed along the same lines. And we see the transformations in the technology that is available today, this redefinition of the experience all around. And it does cause us to wonder, should we rethink as well the way in which we're measuring the business and the metrics that we're utilizing to drive our decisions and to communicate with confidence across the organization? Some of the examples that we hear, and it's not necessarily tossing everything out the window, but it's taking a deep look in the mirror and saying, when was the last time that I took strategic decisions based on this metric? And what is really driving my thinking and my ability to obtain the resources that I have? And things like time to value from an employee perspective, the emergence of uptime as a service, as we're going to talk more about when we get into the analytics and the utilization of data, the technology adoption as one of the elements that is probably should be at the top of service leaders' agenda, and how they incorporate these new opportunities into the roadmap are all examples of how we should challenge ourselves and rethink, do we have the right metrics in order to guide us along the objectives that we have?
Yeah, and just supplementing here, we hear a little bit of changing tide in terms of the service leader's mindset. So we're, pandemic, very cost business continuity oriented. Emerging from the pandemic, very revenue oriented growth. How do we turn our mindset back to a growth mindset? This last year, it was growth, but with an eye towards customer innovation. So how do we align our growth to where our customers are going? This year, we saw a revisiting and a returning to a cost orientation. There's a little bit of trepidation. Listen, inaugurations coming up, U.S. election year last year, a lot of financial headwinds and challenges in the world. There's a lot of geopolitical activities that are causing some real concerns still, and Godspeed to all those that are affected by that. But we do see a return to a cost mindset. The KPIs and metrics survey gave us and revealed to us that there's a return to a cost mindset. So there's going to be continued pressure on growth. And if you think about services contribution, right, it's revenue on the numerator, it's cost on the denominator. If you can't increase revenue, you've got to reduce the denominator, right? So we're going to see a continued focus on cost optimization, automation, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Listen, we're going to talk about some other things in terms of, levers around talent and things to that effect. I think that we run the risk of making service commoditized in terms of boring, making it boring and, taking people out of the equation. Actually, most commonly, that's what service leaders talk about as their differentiation. So I'm kind of a little bit worried about it, but I'm cautiously optimistic that it will be done in a way that sort of maps and marries the people element, which is the differentiation side and the avoidance of commoditization, with this cost optimization side of things. But returning back to number 2, in terms of the key metrics for service experience and looking at how the success and efficacy of the service business is being measured this coming year, we see a change. We continue to see an evolution of causal metrics and leading metrics versus lagging metrics, some of the achievement-based metrics, and the return and revisiting to a cost orientation is something that we're closely watching as we tread through the first half of the year here. Let's move on to number 3, Gerardo. What do you say?
We shall. And this is another big one, because we see this rising importance of both ethical and sustainable practices and the way in which these are measured. Just last month, we had a service journey day at Tetra Pak, which, excuse me, which I couldn't join because I was welcoming my newborn son into the world. But in connecting with John about the takeaways from that day, one of the things that came out is we kind of think about sustainability as a silo and assign it to some sustainability SAR and expect to get great results across the organization. And as we are seeing what are best performers doing along these lines, it is positioning sustainability and ethical performance as part of the central strategy of the organization. And what is driving that? It's sure doing good, but more importantly, it's how do we use it to manage the risk? How do we use it to be compliant with the regulations that exist today and that may come tomorrow? One interesting statistic is that organizations that are excelling in corporate social responsibility are also doing better in terms of resilience because they proactively understand the trade-offs and the motivations of the different stakeholders that they need to manage. We also see that from organizations that are incorporating employees with from a perspective of neurodiversity. And in creating these processes, they're able to better leverage and understand the talent of the entire workforce. So there are benefits along with the talent attraction, customer goodwill, but also in terms of the innovation that it can drive within the organizations as we throw this challenge internally. There's this Greek proverb that says necessity is the mother of invention. And I think it is something to be embraced as we get into 2025.
Look, we all appreciate that customers are more selective. They build their partnerships, they choose their consumer orientation around the sustainable and ethical practices of those that are producing those goods and services. We totally believe in the importance of it. And if you revisit number 1, this existential threat to service leaders, We're obviously hearing more and more Fortune, every company that's public, the requirement to report on their sustainability impact, and it's becoming, really woven into the enterprise story, if you will. And if service leaders want to help their cause in terms of being welcome to the C-suite, achieving ethical and sustainable practices within service, reducing truck rolls, reducing repeat visits, optimizing route planning, load bearing, approaches that look at the flow of parts to and from the customer or to and from distribution centers. How can we nearshore versus offshore, and eliminate some of the carbon footprint that we're impacting with these logistical challenges and nightmares? There's a lot of good opportunity for service leaders to take what we're doing today and map what we're doing to the way that sustainability is mapped and traced and tracked. I don't think that we have to change much. I think that we need to marry these two stories together, and those service leaders that will find their way into the C-suite discussion, I think, will be more closely aligned to that. So that's one of the predictions that we have here. Let's move on to number 4. What do you say?
Yeah, and this one is about one of the trends that we're seeing coming from outside of service, but definitely having an influence, and that is the shifts that are happening in the manufacturing industry.
Yeah.
We see manufacturing companies going out of the top 10 in terms of market capitalization for the first time in decades. We see a rise in product returns from a manufacturing perspective, and all these challenges on that side, there's good and bad for people in our world. On the good side, that suggests that there's going to be a higher level of attention, a higher acknowledgement of the value that service can provide to that bottom line and the financial objectives of the larger organization. On the other hand, we're also at risk of what could be defined as a hostile takeover. So service and the service organization and the motivations and the understanding of how that experience is to be delivered getting taken over by processes that don't necessarily adapt or tools that aren't built to prioritize the same elements that we want to put at the top of our objectives in the service industry, as we care about, again, keep going back to the customers, the employees, and the financial responsibilities.
Yeah, just building on your thoughts there, Gerardo. You're right. There's not a single manufacturing company. Well, there might be Apple, right? That's in the top 10 of the S&P 500 right now by market cap. And in 1999, if you look back and revisit history, 4 out of the top 10 were. So there's goodness in that storyline, right? That means that manufacturing-led, product-led companies are going to turn to service more commonly, and that's goodness. But that means that they're going to revisit how and why and what we are doing within the service orientation, within the service organization. So that means that there's going to be a little bit more inspection, maybe revisiting how, maybe layering in some changes. But we obviously believe in asset lifecycle as a continuum, right? That it starts with the simulation, the production of goods, the distribution of goods, the supporting of goods, and then learning from the customer experience and bringing it back into the design loop. Product returns are at an all-time high for the manufacturing industry. So there's a great opportunity for service leaders to have that post-mortem opportunity with manufacturing leaders to produce smarter, more effective products for customers. And the relationship between manufacturing operations and service, I think, is going to build this year, and so that's a positive thing. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one.
Yeah, and every year one of the research projects that we conduct is the Service Leaders Agenda. And 2 out of the top 3 areas that came out in the 2024 version, and we're going to be releasing this year's version in just a couple of weeks. but they were service innovation and expansion of the service portfolio. And that is great, but that has to come from somewhere, right? Not everybody can go and tackle the same customers, and there's a finite pool of that. And one of the things that we've been hearing this year is how can organizations leverage the capabilities that they have and apply them to adjacent industries. And that is one of the ways in which we see that potential growth of revenue, that expansion of the footprint, that attraction of the talent, because now the skill sets that your employees develop can be applied in a wider set of tools. And it also helps with what John brought up earlier, which is how do we stop service from or prevent service from becoming boring for the front line. So all of these things serve as motivation. It will likely represent that within the industry now you have a new competitor that is coming in from the outside, from places that you weren't traditionally competing from, and it is something for organizations to become aware of. And from a customer perspective, I would say this is definitely good news, because it has all the probabilities to increase the experience that is being received as organizations look to differentiate themselves. And it's also going to continue to be a driver for that efficiency. Who is able to look into what is the data that they need to acquire and to utilize in order to become more efficient, in order to get that better understanding of their customers, in order to see where can they apply the things that they know in a way that is reliable and that can compensate them for it.
Yeah, I think the multi-vendor services storyline here is it's not one that hasn't been here, right? We've all been looking at multi-vendor services as a strategic opportunity for ourselves, but also a competitive threat, right? Where you take the healthcare industry, you've got competitors supporting other competitors' products that are in field, right? That's pretty typical. I think what's atypical is companies reinventing themselves with capabilities that you wouldn't see as a competitive threat, and offering services because of the inventorying of skill set, right? If you've got mechanical background, well, mechanical can be applied to a number of different industries, right? Is there an opportunity for these organizations to increase their footprint and capability to take on customer demand and bite into the apple, if you will, in terms of taking some of the market share of the services and support? So you think about in a hospital environment, right? Are there internal operations, staying on that thread, are there internal operations that could commandeer those support agreements that are maintaining the equipment? Do they have those technical capabilities? Obviously manufacturers would argue no, but there's a continued sort of expansion of this competitive threat that we're hearing more and more about, and it's not from the typical competitor. So just buyer beware, kind of a cautionary tale here. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Number 6, we've got moving to customer hyper-personalization. Gerardo, you want to talk a little bit about this?
I do, and it is this is one of those trends which is something more of a challenge, but a necessary challenge that best performers need to embrace. Why? Because we've talked already about this. How do we keep a service from being commoditized? And we want to bring this innovation. The barriers to entry into a lot of the analytical capabilities, the AI itself, are coming down, and that means that those who want to remain best performers or who want to become the leaders in service need to start doing something differently. And what we mean by customer hyper-personalization is that personalized customer experience, but also including the personalized service contracts. And that is not something that we have seen effectively applied at scale yet. But it is the direction in which organizations should start preparing themselves and moving and resetting expectations within the organization for how the mindset needs to evolve, and it will also create a change in the expectations of customers. 10, 15 years ago, we didn't have the expectation that we would receive our packages within 24 hours, and then Amazon changed the game. This could be one of those situations as well, where expectations are truly transformed. It's not going to become easy, but there's a lot of external elements to reiterate the service becoming a commodity. Sorry, New Year's dilemmas with my accent. The lower barriers to entry, and that are going to push us in that direction, I believe.
Yeah, and I think hyper personalization requires it's a more advanced form of personalization, right? It's using real-time data, and in order to achieve that predictive and proactive approach to enabling a success orientation with the customer, you need to have the presence of certain technologies that enable that, right? So, AI, the Gen AI, there's so many different capability requirements in order to achieve this, right? So I think if you think about, the maturity framework for being able to support hyper personalization, there's a lot of ground to travel in order to get there, truly. And, customers are already there. They already want it, and they're choosing based on those experiences. So a little bit of catch-up game is required by service leaders to really get themselves to a position where they can support that hyper-personalization, that real-time data access, that real-time understanding of how the customer wants to receive service, what channel, and how they navigate across those channels. It's a tricky one, and it leads to the belief that service leaders need to continue to push for this technology agenda to be realized, because of the customer's desires, right, which are continuing to evolve in that direction. Let's get into the next one here, which kind of combats both.
Yeah, because if hyper personalization is the destination, then what are the vehicles to help us get there? Is finally utilizing this proprietary data at scale, using it as a differentiator, and the utilization of IoT data, having not a reactionary of what was the data about the asset after it's broken, but having a proactive strategy of how that data from the condition of the install base is going to influence the way in which we design the contracts. It's going to influence the skill sets that we drive within our workforce. It's going to influence design all the way back into manufacturing, getting back to those earlier trends. And we've heard for years this desire to move into how do we get predictive about what are the service requirements that are needed. And then based on that predictive ability, how do we get smart about the actions that we need to proactively trigger, because it's going to be more efficient, because it's going to help the customer have a better experience, because it's going to reduce the downtime of an asset, or allow us to merge multiple service events into a single instance that integrates the right person with the necessary parts that need to be there, the awareness of the customer so that it doesn't disrupt their operation. That is how predictive and proactive evolves from being a buzzword or a pipe dream into a true differentiator. I believe now all the ingredients are truly there, and it's evolved from a desire to a necessity, almost an urgency for organizations to start truly leveraging this capability.
Yeah, I think it's not just an enabler too, right? Like all the goodness that you just talked about. It's also a barrier of entry on number 5 that we just, revisiting the number 5 prediction, which is that multi-vendor becomes the number 1 competitive threat, right? It's a barrier of entry to some of those competitive threats. The data is the oil Data is the fuel, and data is the new currency, right? So we all appreciate those messages. And the asset data is incredibly important to triage and diagnosis, to supportability, to everything that we need to do in terms of that full asset lifecycle story that we've been talking about. Let's get to number 8.
Yep. And this is one that emerged in part from the findings in our service index. That very briefly, it's a maturity framework that we developed and introduced just in our conference, our executive symposium in September. A maturity framework to help organizations define the readiness to deliver a holistic experience. And that holistic nature is that integration of the customer side, the financial, and the employee, which you've heard me talk about before in this podcast. Turns out that the amount of data that we're collecting about the employee experience, that the amount of analytics that we're doing, that the use cases of our applications of artificial intelligence into becoming predictive for the risks that we see in the front line are just not there, are lagging significantly across the board relative to our understanding and our management of the customer experience. And the irony behind that is, as John pointed out, our frontline, our employees are going to be the differentiator, are what enables us as service professionals to deliver those experiences to the customers and to reach that level of hyper-personalization when empowered by the right technology and tools. So shouldn't we be doing a better job, at a more professional job at understanding and applying this intelligence about our own teams? And one of the trends that we see supplementing this is the meritocracy. Well, in order to make a meritocracy truly operational, we need to have the intelligence to see who is creating those merits, and not just selecting based on alternative elements, but allowing the data to speak for itself.
Yeah, I think the frontline experience continues to be a great source for innovation, but also we continue to see a disconnect between the frontline and the back office still, and we continue to advocate for the connection of that frontline experience, the voice to be heard all the way up to leadership. That innovation pathway should be inclusive of those viewpoints. And those frontline agents should be heard. The other thing that I would say about this is, there's an opportunity to look at, like we've talked about the time spent finding information, paperwork, and admin. There's that's more macro, right? There's other micro elements in the frontline experience that we can improve, right? And it could be a show of care. So, for example, in rigorous industries where there's a requirement to do heavy lifting, that we demand and require stretching and preparing that workforce, slowing down all these utilization efforts to actually stop and demand and require that our frontline is stretching before doing this rigorous work. There's opportunities to improve the employee experience at the micro level that I think is going to be a keen focus this year. And I would encourage our listenership here to think about all the little micro opportunities beneath those other elements that we talk about all the time. The time spent finding information, the paperwork and admin, the isolation, the driving time, windshield time. There are other things that we need to think about: safety, and improving the experience, and collaboration amongst the team. So,
yeah. And before we move on, I just want to comment on top of that.
Yeah.
The reduction of mental stress, for instance, is one of the things that we started to measure in this voice of the field service engineer and voice of the contact center agent. And one would expect that if technology is helping the workers do their work more confidently, more efficiently, find information faster, all of those, then our level of stress should go down.
Yep.
and we're saying that is not the case.
Yeah.
Somewhere around I believe 62% only say that their mental stress has gone down,
Yep.
while north of 90% say that efficiency has gone up. So just as we advocate for having leading indicators in to drive the customer experience, to drive the business growth, this is an area that deserves the same level of attention and the same approach to see what are those micro elements that John was talking about that can give us leading information about those end goals that we want to drive, like engagement, like mental health, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points, Gerardo. Thanks for sharing the data. Let's get into the number 9.
Yeah. So another red flag, if you will, that we're seeing, but more from a systems perspective, and we've heard that the systems that are creating silos, that are bringing redundancy into the technology stack of organizations, that were functional at first but weren't designed to scale with the business, or specifically to scale in a manner that was cost efficient to the business that is operating them. All of this have been sources of complaints in the past, and we are starting to hear voices of, it's not just a complaint, but now there are serious conversations about fully displacing this systems. The time for catching up and for evolving is running out, and this interoperability is something that to a point explains it itself, and and it is just of paramount importance at this point. So anybody who is not aware of who is not recognizing this is not going to be around for long.
Yeah, it's I would say the observation here is that some of the system decisions that have been made in the last decade were made without line of sight to some of the new technology innovations that are happening today, right? And the scalability of those platforms is challenging the longevity of these incumbent platforms. And so you'd be shocked how often we are engaged to support change management efforts that are full system overhauls. And if you look at the Service Leaders Agenda benchmark survey over this last several years, we saw this battle between CRM and field service, right? CRM was the number 3 expanded investment. Field service management systems, service lifecycle management was the number 2 or number 1, right? So on the new investment. So, manufacturers are saying that CRM isn't enough to manage the asset lifecycle story, right? So that's why we saw sort of a double clicking on the FSM platforms and the SLM platforms. But now what we're seeing is that incumbent field service management and SLM platforms that were bought back when are not able to scale with the business as we go forward. And so it is making them susceptible to displacement. And so that's one angle here. The other thing I would say is don't sleep on augmented reality. It is making a real big comeback. If a picture's worth whatever, 100 word, whatever that saying is, then a video must be worth more, right? So augmented reality, there's we're seeing the connection between AI and AR happening more commonly. So that's another thing. And then the other thing I would say is AI. AI is, as it becomes more cost effective in terms of implementation, I think we're going to see the achievement of scale happen more commonly. We that was one of the storylines from this past year was, AI meeting the challenge when it was time to scale, right? Pilots were plentiful, but scaling was the challenge. And I think that the cost angle here is going to help with the scalability of AI deployments and the accessibility of AI to small and mid-sized organizations. Gerardo, any viewpoints here before we get into number 10, our last one?
I think you covered it.
All right. In the big finish line, go ahead, Gerardo.
Yes. So this I really like because it's about a topic that we've been talking about for a long time, but now we're finally changing the approach. And we've been hearing of the talent crisis, the talent shortage, hard to talent retention, and it's always a little bit of a commiserating, and that is necessary at some point, but now we're turning the corner on this. And there's this transformational opportunity, which is the Gen AI agents that are coming in and flooding the market. And that is a key difference, if subtle, that this is not a tool. This is an agent that the rest of our workforce has to interact with, not utilize, but interact with. And that changes the mindset of how do we build the skill sets, how do we attract the talent, how do we drive career management, and how do we balance that, keeping the activities of our workforce fun and motivating and challenging, while achieving efficiency in many of the elements that can be delegated to this new set of agents. For example, calling uh, making a phone call to a colleague when you're stuck in the field keeps being one of the top three actions that the technicians take. Well, what if instead of calling your colleague, you were able to leverage an AI agent, have a similar experience, and in doing so, that other colleague has more time to finish their own work. So there has to be a balance so that we don't kill engagement and we don't kill team building, but we do have a resource that is ready to go and that is going to continue to scale in order to help us manage this. I would say probably decade-long problem around the talent crisis.
Yeah, the other thing I would say here, Gerardo, is I think we're going to see a double click by service leaders in terms of journey mapping the service experiences that are happening, the many different service experiences, whether it's PM, whether it's break fix, whether it's inspections. There's a spectrum of skill set and skills based requirements across these different scenarios that might allow for the subordination of the experience depending on the skill set requirement. So, that less experienced agents could be deployed to certain scenarios versus the more complex scenarios. And I suspect that we're going to see service leaders spend a lot more time. I'm hearing it actually commonly on journey mapping and building a talent subordination across that experience in a way that allows them to lever against the talent crisis they're facing in market, right? That we have this shortage of experienced engineers. We have this shortage of that's caused by the retirement crisis. How do we subordinate this experience and create a pathway where we can manage demand but also keep everybody busy in a way that we have high utilization rates. So there's maybe a healthy balance that could be struck here, but I think that that's one of the things that we're going to see more commonly. So that's my last prediction here. Any last viewpoints from you, Gerardo, as we kick off into the year here?
Well, just encouraging the audience. I mean, this is our top 10, but in all likelihood, you will have your own list, and please, by all means, challenge this, amend this, engage us. We want to continue driving innovation. We want to continue addressing the questions that are relevant, and when it comes to the insights that we develop and that we look for in our research, we're always looking for that actionable angle. So looking forward to that engagement, looking forward to continue sharing the stage with you, John. It's been a privilege, and it's going to be a very exciting, if challenging, 2025. So
outstanding. Well, thank you to our audience. Thank you for joining us today. If we can be a resource to you, as Gerardo stated, we're happy to engage with you on one-on-one basis and walk through some of these observations and predictions. And if you have something to supplement the conversation, we welcome you to comment, share, and we're here to help support. So again, Happy New Year and good luck as we navigate this coming year. We're here to support you in service, and we appreciate you joining us today. We'll see you on the next podcast. Thank you for joining. Have a great day. Have a great start to the year. Talk to you soon.